There's been a lot of talk in the Euros about how late goals are arriving. And I checked the stats and they are arriving a bit later. But it's more important when you're looking at football to understand the incentive to score. That's what drives a lot of the match. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get instant notification of new videos as they're released. So when you talk about incentive to score, it's really simple to understand. What incentive is there for a team to take a lead, retrieve a goal, so on and so forth. And that very often determines the nature, the ebb and flow of a match. But especially so in tournaments where there's an element of a knockout, either in a group stage or an outright knockout match. And it's really simple in that if you look at matches where there's an incentive to score, then the chance of a late goal is necessarily increased. The chance of seeing a goal from a certain situation is nonetheless going to rise. And especially if there's no goal throughout the match, then the chance of the team pushing and pushing and pushing for that late goal is necessarily going to increase. So understanding incentive to score is an important part of understanding what position you should take on football. Do you take a position on the basis that somebody really must score, or do you take a position on the basis that really there is no incentive to score? And if you look at the France-Switzerland match, yes, either of them could have scored and made a difference to the match, but overall there was no incentive to score. Well, there always is an incentive to score, but can you see where I'm coming from? There was a lower incentive to score. Basically, if both teams drew, then at the end of the day it really wouldn't make an awful lot of difference to their net position within the group. And as it turned out, it was 0-0. But where there's a strong incentive to score, then necessarily teams are going to throw everything at it and try and get that goal at some point during the match. Or say a team goes down and they must at least draw, then of course the incentive to score goes up. If you look at matches very, very closely, you will see that the propensity for a goal increases in these situations and it decreases for the opposing situation. So when you go into a match, not only is the team set up differently or some players are rested, but also people are beginning to think about the match after this one. And as a consequence, there's a 50-50 ball. Do they go for it or not? And they're sort of thinking, well, never mind. So compare that to a situation where you could qualify for the semi-finals or the final, or do something spectacular. Then the situation inverts itself completely. People will go all out for it, and if you're in the last 10 minutes of a match like that, then all of a sudden all hell can be let loose as people try and chase that critical goal. So yeah, I often look at incentive to score, and that changes depending upon the game state of the match as well. So if there's an early goal, if there's a goal just before half time, and so on and so forth, there are many ways that this interacts within there, but incentive to score is something that I'm always looking for and I have an assessment of before a match even starts. I'm thinking through what happens if the following scenario occurs, what happens if this occurs, and what happens if we reach this point in the match and the following has happened. Where does that leave the incentive to score? And necessarily you would take a position based upon whether you think that's going to happen or not. But also if you look at, in Euro 2012 there's a great example as well, as there was a match with no incentive to score and the draw was incredibly short priced, and there was a lot of speculation about whether the two teams would just faff around until such time as the match ended and they both got the draw that they required. And because of that, they had to come out and make statements that they were going to field strong teams and so on, and the price of the draw drifted and drifted and drifted. Also look at the Italian league towards the end of the season. It's a little bit better over recent years since there have been all of the corruption scandals, but prior to that there's a blog post that I put up saying I predict a draw, because you could pretty much tell that if there were two Italian teams where a draw would be a favourable result, the draw could go off at ridiculous odds. And then the match would end up a draw anyhow, with some rather bizarre situations occurring within the match itself. So whether the incentive to score is, prior to the match, or there's some situation that requires it to happen or not, it's always worth paying attention to, because that's what will drive substitutions, drive the incentive of players to do certain things, and so on and so forth. So before a match has even started, that's one of the things I'm looking at, and looking at all of the scenarios that could lead up to situations where there is or isn't an incentive to score. Please like or dislike the video, or leave a comment below. That will allow me to produce better videos and more of them in the future.